You know, when the topic of communism ever comes up, someone will inevitably inform you that, did you know real communism's never been tried? Is that a fact? What about here? Or here? Or here? Or here? Here? I mean, were none of these things real communism? And if so, why? What makes these things not real communism? Now, I will admit that, like anything, the meaning of words can be manipulated or even change over time. But generally speaking, communism as a social, economic, and political theory has been defined by one core principle articulated by Karl Marx. Karl wrote in the Communist Manifesto that the theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. Okay, well, if the abolition of private property is in fact real communism, then I guess you can claim that it's true, that no society has ever completely abolished all private property. For instance, even in communist societies, you still owned your toothbrush. I mean, it wasn't actually the property of the people, right? Because that would imply that pretty much all of the people could use our toothbrush. And that sounds a little absurd, and this is, of course, where a student of Karl Marx will point out that he didn't mean all private property. When he said the words private property, he allowed for things like personal possessions. Instead, he was talking about bourgeois property, which is to say capital, or the means of production. Okay, now that we've cleared that up, I guess what you're telling me is we can't own, or me as an individual, I can't own a factory, trucks, planes, machinery, or anything else that I would use to actually make goods or services and deliver them. So who is going to own these things? Well, according to Marx, the people will own it. Okay, well, how are the people going to get it? Simple. They're going to use political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat organized as the ruling class. Got it. The communists are going to use all political powers available in order to seize the means of production. Well, last I checked, Lenin, Mao, Pol Pot, Castro, and many others did seem to give that a try. Now, maybe you don't think they succeeded, or perhaps you don't think they made it all the way to Marx's promised end state, where we would have a dictatorship of the proletariat, where there would be no state, no government, no classes, and of course, no capitalism. But saying that that's never been tried because the people trying it were never able to achieve the end state is a little bit like saying that no one ever tried to climb Mount Everest unless they made it to the top. So perhaps the real frustration is not that real communism hasn't been tried, it's that every attempt to try it hasn't produced the promised results. And if that's the case, okay, communist, what would you do differently than everybody else? Would you seize the means of production differently? Would you immediately abolish the state and just have communal ownership over everything? Would you immediately abolish all classes, and would that include managerial or political classes? What would you do if the people having all of their production seized from them got a little bit upset about that? What apparatus would you use to quell the rebellion? So many questions and so many different answers from communists who were certainly trying to implement real communism, and yet every attempt failed. So why? Well, they have explanations for that as well. One of the explanations is that it was actually the evil machinations of greedy capitalists who were constantly undermining their noble efforts. Okay, but communist countries were actively trying to undermine capitalist countries as well, and the capitalist countries are still pretty much here while the communist ones are either gone or hanging on by a thread. Or maybe it was just bad leadership, right? Maybe the real problem was not the theory of communism, it was the people trying to implement it over the years. You know, because they got corrupted. But then that begs another question, right? If every time someone is trying to faithfully implement real communism, they get corrupted by it, is there any kind of leader that it won't corrupt? And then sometimes you'll have people say, well, you're judging communism by some of these impacts that happened in isolated incidences, but that's not communism itself. Okay, well, perhaps it's true that communism doesn't have to degrade into authoritarian police states that rob people of their civil and individual liberties, lock them up in gulags, and produce millions in death from famine and purges. But most or all of those things do seem to happen every time someone tries to implement real communism. So if we go back to our real question of why hasn't real communism ever been tried? Maybe it's because at some point the death, destruction, poverty, and oppression it required to implement became too high a cost for the people it was being imposed on. Or, as a capitalist might put it, the costs associated with trying to implement real communism so horribly outweighed any perceived benefits that people just abandon it.